I want to speak today about freedom in the fire. Freedom in the fire. I read about these trees called sequoia trees. They're huge, magnificent trees. They're found in America mostly. These trees can grow up to like 300 feet tall. They can live for over 2,000 years. What's important and significant about these trees is on the branches they have cones. And inside the cones are the seeds for the potential to therefore grow more trees. The only problem is that these cones don't open naturally over time like many other cones do. The cones only open through fire. So for example, if lightning strikes and there's a bit of a fire in the forest, what will happen is the heat of the fire will cause these cones to open. And the seeds then will fall out and drop into the ground, germinate, and then produce more trees. Sometimes we look at fire as negative, and most times it is, especially if it's in suburban areas. But out in the wild, in the forest areas, sometimes it's a good thing. When we see a fire, what we normally do is we run and we throw water on it. And experts say that when we do this, we actually damage the environment more. Because that fire is a natural part of God's process in the wild. The fire burns out all the dead wood and stuff and makes room for new growth. You and I are just like those cones. Inside of you are seeds. Seeds of greatness. Seeds of purpose and potential. And sometimes it's only through the fire that they can become a reality. Sometimes we have to go through adversity, trials of fire, pain and discomfort. And we don't like the fire, we don't like the pain, we don't like the discomfort, we don't like the things we don't understand. But sometimes you can only reach the next level of your destiny, your fullest potential, if you go through the fire. It's in those times when the seeds will come out, you'll bloom and blossom and become everything that God created you to be. I love what David says. He says this in Psalm 4, he says, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me." This is King James. "Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer." Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Did you hear that? He doesn't say, "You have enlarged me in the good times, when I was on top of my game, when things were going good, when my health was good, when my finances were good." He says, "God, you have enlarged me in my distress, in my discomfort, in my discouragement. God, you enlarged me when I had to fight a giant twice my size. God, you enlarged me when King Saul was chasing me all around trying to kill me. God, you enlarged me when even my own father tried to hold me back from my destiny." Those trials of fire were all part of the plan. David would never become the king he was, the greatest king of Israel, if he never went through those trials, if he never went through the pain, the discomfort. My challenge to you today is this: don't fight the fire. It's a natural part of the process of your maturity, of your growth. My challenge to you is this: embrace the fire. There is favor in the fire. There is freedom in the fire. We see this story played out in a beautiful story. This principle played out in a beautiful story in the Bible, and it's found in the book of Daniel. So if you have your Bibles with you, if not, on the screen that is projected for your convenience. Daniel chapter 3, we're going to read about the 3 Hebrew boys. It says this: "Then a herald cried out, to you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Some of us are familiar with this story. Let me give you the historical and geographical context of the story. It takes place about 600 years before Jesus was born, 600 BC. At this time, the king of Babylon, his name was King Nebuchadnezzar. He was on a military campaign to conquer the southern part of Israel, which was called Judah. And while he was on his military campaign, this campaign took place over many years, a good couple of years. It finally culminated with the siege of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital of Judah. So if he conquered that, he would have conquered the whole land. And there was a siege. He broke down the walls. He burnt down the city of Jerusalem. He burnt down the temple of Solomon. And we all know the beautiful stories of that great temple. It was burnt to the ground. He took all the gold and silver from the temple and he took it away back to Babylon. And with that, he took all the people also, not everybody. They left about 10%, what they call like a remnant. He left them behind in Jerusalem and Israel. He didn't want the poor and destitute. He only wanted the cream of the crop, the best, the people of good stature. It actually says he wanted them to be handsome. I don't know about the ugly people. I don't know where they were. They were maybe left behind. But he says he wanted people of good stature. They had to be of royal dignity. They had to be very handsome. So he took these people. And some of us know that there's one particular person that he took with in this exile. Do you know what his name was? Daniel, hence the book, Daniel. Let me give you a map of where we're talking about. I like to give you the map. It makes a lot more sense when you look at where we're talking about. We're looking at this side, which is Israel, modern day Israel. There's Jerusalem. So what he done was he exiled, he conquered Jerusalem. He took all the people and he exiled them to Babylon. And here's the ruins of Babylon, modern day Iraq. The actual ruins of Babylon are found not about a mile or two away from Baghdad. You're familiar with Baghdad, the capital city of Iraq. And as you can see, it shows like a weird arrow. You would think that if they were going to go, they would just travel straight. But across this area is a horrible, arid, mountainous, desert area. So what they would do, they'd actually go up and follow the Euphrates River all the way down. Because it's obviously safe and they got nourishment and food all the time. So they took them, all these people with them, and with them was guys called Daniel and Shadrach, Abednego, and Meshach. So let's read that in Daniel chapter 1. It says this: among those who were chosen, some from Judah, Daniel. Listen to these names: Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Have you heard of those names before? We're all very familiar with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but this is the original Hebrew names. And it says the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, he gave Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego. As I said, most Christians know those last three. Many Christians don't even know that they had original Hebrew names. And what I find out interesting is the meaning behind these names. So what I want to share with you just for a moment is give you the meanings of these names, because it makes so much more sense while we reading the context. If we look at the left-hand side, we'll see the Hebrew names. Daniel, it means God is my judge. Dan means judge. And when you see El at the end of a name, that means God. God is a singular name. That is titled God. If you have a name like Bethel, Daniel, Michael, Renel, anything with the E-L, that means that you've probably got the name of God in your name. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious. Hanan means grace. And then at the end of that you'll see Nia, Yah. It's a personal name of God, Yahweh. As in Azariah, Hananiah, Zechariah, Elijah. Anytime you get a name with the end of the word ending in Yah, it's a personal name of God, Yahweh. Mishael is also the same name, Michael, our English translation of Michael, and it means who is like God? Who is as powerful as God? Who can compare to his power and his majesty? Azariah means the Lord helps. Again, at the end we have God, and Azar meaning to help. So they have these beautiful God-honoring names. I mean, the best names you can ever give a child. When they went to Babylon, they got changed. And what you don't see in the Bible is what these names mean. Belshazzar means the treasurer of Bel. Bel was one of the major chief gods of the Babylonians. God is my judge. That was his original name. When he got his name was changed to honor a pagan, false god. Hananiah was changed to Shadrach. It means commander of Aku, the moon god. Mishael, his name means who is awesome and as powerful as God. His name was changed to who is as awesome and as powerful as Aku, the moon god. It's actually a disgrace. You can imagine how they felt when their names were changed. Azariah got the best name of all, Abednego. And it means servant of Nego. Nego was another false god of the Babylonians. And you know what's interesting? Their names may have changed, but it did not change who they were at all. And we're going to see that in the story. If you read the text from Genesis 1, chapter 1, 2, and 3, we'll see that their names may have been changed, but that in no way altered their faith or their belief or their love and worship of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there, I hope you were a bit informed. As I said, when you read the chapter, you won't see that. And it's important that you do, because it's not just that the names were changed. What they were changed to and what they meant to those three Hebrew boys, and these were young men. They were in their early 20s when they were taken. Young men, the names were changed. They're in a different world, strangers in a strange land, eating different food, learning different customs. And while they were on this one day, the king decides, King Nebuchadnezzar was generally a bad dude. If you look at the history books, he was not a good guy. But he had moments of lunacy and moments of good times when he actually did worship God. This was one of those nutball times when he decided he's going to make a statue, like 100 feet tall of gold. and he's going to force everybody to worship it. You could do that if you were the king of Babylon. And this is 100 feet tall. If you want to get an idea of how tall this is, does anybody know where Caledon Street is in Utenay? Put up your hand. Does anybody know where Church Street is? On the corner of those two streets is the old post office. You may be familiar with that, one of the most beautiful, oldest buildings in Utenay. And right on the corner of it, did you know that the side facing Caledon was the post office, and the side facing church was the government buildings? And even today, if you ride past, you'll see the royal coat of arms on top of that. And then on the corner where those two meet is called Victoria Tower. Did you know that? It's this big, beautiful tower in honor of Queen Victoria. That is about 100 feet tall. So when you ride past again, look up and just imagine this big statue that Nebuchadnezzar would have made. And he said, when he made a decree, and he said, when you hear the music, you must bow down and worship the statue. That's it. So he called all his dignitaries in, the politicians and the mayors and all the ward councillors and lawyers. I can't believe he actually invited lawyers. But you know how corrupt he was if he invited lawyers. He invited even the lawyers, and he said, when the music plays, everybody must bow down and worship the statue. And they all done this. And then during this time, or at least afterwards, the officials of the king, they were very jealous of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they were promoted to positions of power, and they hated them. They hated the Jews. So they went to tattletale by the king, and they said, King, did you know that there's certain people that do not bow down and worship the statue? They honor their own God, and they don't honor the gods of Babylon. They were tattletale. The king was furious. He said, who are these men? Bring them to me. So they brought these young men, Shadrach, Abednego, and Meshach, and they brought them to him, and they stood before the king. And the king said, listen guys, I know you, I promoted you. Maybe you didn't get the memo or the WhatsApp. I sent it to the group. Maybe you guys didn't have data. I don't know. But you didn't get the message. The message was simple. When the music sounds, you bow down and worship this great image that I've created. He said, I like you guys. I'm going to give you a second chance. He says, so when the music plays, just bow down and worship a statue. And they looked at him and they said, well, you don't have to do that. Don't worry about the music. Because we're not going to do that. We are not, never ever going to bow down and worship that statue. We worship the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we will never bow down to any false god. And he says, well, then I'll have to throw you into the fire. And they said, well, then do that. I don't think they said it like that. But they said, well, you can do that. Because if you put us in the fire, my God, he will deliver me from that fire. And he says, if he doesn't, it will be fine. We'll still praise him. Basically, he was saying, you can throw me in, our God will deliver me. If our God doesn't deliver me, he will still deliver me. Does that sound confusing to you? If they die, they will still be delivered. They'll be translated into a much better place to be with God forever and ever. So there wasn't even hassle. So the king said, gods, bind them. They bound them with ropes and threw them into this fiery furnace. It was so hot that the gods that threw them in died. And I'm an Englishman. And if anybody's had a braai with me, I apologize in advance. Englishmen make braais pretty small, 4 pieces of wood, 500 blitz, because that's the only thing that will burn. And it's a controlled little braai, and we have our little chops on it. But I've been to braais in Dispatch with Afrikaans dudes, and there is no limit to the number of trees that they will cut down to have their braai. Don't look at Rudy. They just keep on piling it on, and the fire is as big as this church. And there's like no end to it. You're just waiting for that little piece of boerewors, but it never comes because the fire is so big. That's kind of what I had in mind with this fiery furnace. It was so big and intense. They throw them in. That would have been the end of these 3 men. And the king looks inside, and he's looking, and he sees something that bothers him. And he says to his officials, did we not throw 3 people in the fire? They said, yeah, we definitely threw 3 people. He says, and why is it that I see 4 people in the fire? He says, I see 4 people, and that 4th person is like the Son of God. In some translations it says, the Son of the gods. Because you must remember, this was 600 years before Jesus came, and we only familiarize ourselves with Jesus being the Son of God. The king had no revelation of Jesus being the Son of God. So the correct translation is probably, he's one of the sons of the gods in plural. But we know now, looking back, that 4th person was indeed the Son of God, Jesus Christ in his pre-incarnate state. And it's interesting, those men inside the fire, they didn't see the 4th person. It doesn't say that in the text. Only the people outside could see the 4th person. And there's a lesson in that. Sometimes when we're going through the fire, the trials, the pain, the discomfort, the sickness, the health issues, we don't see God. We don't feel Him. We don't experience Him. At those times it feels like God is a million miles away. We don't see anything happen. But you can be rest assured, while you're going through the fire, there's a fourth person with you. Jesus is with you. He's right in the middle of it. And He's making changes. He's making things happen. You might not see it, but it does not mean that the fourth person is not there with you in the midst of the trials of fire. The king says, come out. He calls them out because he sees something's odd. And these three men come out, not the fourth man. Only the three. They come out and they're not burnt. You would think that at least smell like smoke. But the Bible actually says they didn't even smell like smoke. They come out unscathed, unburned. The only thing that was burnt was the ropes that bound them. Because when God sets you free, He sets you free indeed. That's what the Bible says. They came out and King Nebuchadnezzar was beside himself. The first thing he said was, from now on we're going to worship the God of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. What about the statue you made? No, that's a false God. We're going to worship this God. Because this God's the real deal. As I said, the King Nebuchadnezzar, he went through ups and downs believing in God. There were some moments where, yay, and then the next chapter he falls again. But this was one of those moments where he said, this is the true God. We're going to worship the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The last verse of that chapter actually says that, and He promoted them to a higher position. You see, the devil sent the fire to destroy them, to defeat them. But God took that same fire and changed it around. And that ended up promoting them to a higher level. And they couldn't have gone through that fire without getting the promotion. It was in that fire, in that trial, in that pain, in that discomfort, where God changed it around and said, yeah, you're going through something, don't worry. It's only temporary. I want to bring you out of this. And you know what? When you come out, you're going to be better off than you were before. That's the fires in your life. We go through the trials of fire. And sometimes it is painful and it's discomforting and we don't want to be there. God is with you in it. And it's a temporary fire. It's a controlled fire. And He's going to bring you out. And when you come out, you will come out just like that cone. You'll be opened up. And inside of you, those seeds will blossom and bloom. You'll rise to a new level of your destiny. You'll discover talents and skills that you never knew you had before. But it had to be through the fire that you can discover that. When God brings you out, you'll come out better off than you were before. This is what it says. I can't even see this. No, not that actually. I don't want you to say that yet. In Peter, I don't have it here, but Peter says this. He says, don't think it's strange when you face fiery trials. 1 Peter 4 verse 12, he says, don't count it strange. Don't think it's strange when you go through fiery trials. I love that phrase, fiery trials. He could have said when you go through problems, when you go through troubles, struggles, adversity. But he mentioned fiery trials on purpose because Peter knew what I'm talking about today. He knew that there will be times when you go through things, trials, a test, a season. It's only temporary. You'll go through a season, a test, where you will go through fires. And he says, don't count it strange. Don't think it odd or surprised. You know, sometimes we get surprised by things happening to us. I can't believe I was sick. It's like it never ever happened to you before. I can't believe there's a war in Ukraine where innocent people are dying. There's been wars for thousands of years. I can't believe that Queen Elizabeth died. How can it be that a person of royalty can die? They've been dying for thousands of years. We kind of go through our life and the predicament we're in, the sickness or the emotional torment or the relationship issues, we kind of find it a surprise. God, I don't understand this. How can this be happening to me? Let me just break it down to you. Whatever you're going through is happening to everybody else, and it's been happening for thousands of years. It's the beauty of this thing we call life. Peter said, don't be surprised by these things, because you will go through them. But it's a trial. It's a test. It's only for a certain period of time. You know that forest rangers, when they go out in the forest, there's sometimes when they actually plan and purposely set fire to the ground. It's part of the forest. You know that. They plan it, they go there and they burn a section of the forest. And you might think, that's crazy. But they're doing it on purpose because they're burning down all the dead wood and all the underbush to make way for new growth. It's called a controlled burn. Sometimes in our life we go through these trials of fire and it seems out of control, doesn't it? We go through this sickness or these relationship issues, these financial burdens, and it feels like, man, I feel so overwhelmed and this fire is out of control. God is going to get the better on me. Let me tell you, it's a controlled burn. God knows what you're in. He knows the limit of the fire. He knows the intensity of the fire. He knows how long it will last. It's not out of control. Everything is in control when you got God on your side. And He knows what you're in, and He knows what you're going through, and He knows when you come out, you're going to be better off than you were before. It's a controlled fire. But those trials of fire are necessary. It's a necessity for you to go through them. And we see this played out in the life of a man called Moses. Last week we spoke about Moses, his birth. If we move 40 years on, we see Moses walking around, and he sees one of the Egyptian guards beating a Hebrew slave. And he steps up with a hand of justice to try and stop this injustice and unfairness. And what he does, he actually kills the Egyptian guard. This would have been the start of his deliverance of the people of Israel. Seeing the injustice and then breaking out and becoming their deliverer. But he kills this Egyptian guard and he buries him, and people see him, and he gets very, very scared, and he knows that once the Pharaoh finds out, he's going to be dead. So he runs, and he runs to the far end of the desert, to a place called Midian, which is in the Sinai Peninsula or in the Arabian Peninsula. And he settles down, and he gets married, he has 2 children. And in his life, it's over. There's no great destiny, no real plan or purpose for his life. One day in the mountains, he sees something that blows him away. God appears to him. Do you know how God appears to him? In a burning bush. Well done. It could have been a dove. It could have been a puffy cloud. It could have been a rainbow with a unicorn. But no, God appeared to Moses in a fiery bush. And Moses looked at the bush, and he was very curious because it was on fire, but it did not burn. And he goes forward, and God could have said, Moses, you are so old. At this time, he was 80 years old. No offense to those who are 80 and above. But God could have said, you're so old. You made so many mistakes. You're a murderer. You know that you killed someone back then. You had such a great destiny, a great plan and purpose. But look at you, Moses, a shepherd. An old shepherd. He didn't say that. He said, Moses, I've got something big for you, brother. He may be old, but it's not over yet. I still want you to become the deliverer of the people of Israel. I still want you to lead them out. You still have purpose and potential and greatness inside of that you have not even looked or touched on yet. And you know what? Moses became that deliverer. At that age, he embraced it, and he went back and he delivered the people out of Egypt. And he led them through the desert for 40 years. He eventually died at the age of 120. Anybody want to live through 120? I do. Especially if you've got purpose and passion and greatness. Like Moses. He could have done that because God led him and said, I've got something in you. You're a cone, and for 40 years it's been locked up and no one's ever seen it, but the trials are coming when that cone will open and those seeds will blossom and bloom. And Moses, you'll become everything that I created you to be. There's so many people in this church that have not touched onto their purpose, their passion, their potential. And we look at the fires and say, I don't want the fire. Maybe it's time that you go through the fire, through the trials, because it's only in the fire that you'll reach the next level of your destiny. I read a story about a man called Salvador Sabina. Salvador Sabina was born and raised in South America, in the Dominican Republic, in a very, very bad environment. At the age of 8, he saw his grandfather stab another person to death. At the age of 11, this man had personally witnessed 4 murders. Can anybody say that in this church? Exactly. At the age of 11, he had witnessed personally 4 murders. There was just a spirit of anger and violence that surrounded him and his family and his upbringing. In his teenage years, he moved to New York City, to the Bronx. If you know the Bronx, it's well known for its gangsterism, for its violence and crime. And it wasn't long before he was getting into trouble. In and out of trouble, in and out of jail. There was one time he actually shot at a police officer. Eventually his crime caught up to him, and he was in prison, a life sentence. He had 18 counts, 18 criminal counts against him. Anything that you could have done wrong, this man would have done it. So there he was in prison. One day he wrote a letter to his mom asking for a book on spiritism, because he thought that he was cursed. And he wanted a book on demons and spirits and hexes and curses. Anyway, she found a friend of hers who was involved in the occult, and they sent him this book. He got the book, he opened it up, and to his surprise, it was the Holy Bible. And he was furious. Threw the book aside. He wanted nothing to do with God. The next morning he woke up, and curious, he started to read the Bible. He read the whole New Testament in 3 days. Let me say that again. The whole New Testament in 3 days. Here's your challenge. From tomorrow morning, start reading the Bible. By Wednesday, you tell me how far you've got. Maybe you can also do it like he did. He read the whole New Testament. At that time, not saved. He wasn't familiar with all the sinner's prayer and how to become a Christian and all the godly stuff. So he done it the best way he could. He negotiated with God. He said, God, if you are alive, like the Bible says you are, come into my cell and save me. That's the best in you. The next morning, 5:30, he's woken up with a voice calling his name, Salvador. He wakes up, looks around. There's no one in the cell. It's a locked cell. There's no one there. He thinks he must be dreaming. Goes back to bed. He hears another time the voice, Salvador. He wakes up and he thinks to himself, I have taken so many drugs in my life, I must be going crazy. Third time he hears that voice, call his name, Salvador. And he knows without a doubt that that is God coming into his cell to save him. Right there and there, Salvador gave his life to the Lord, became a Christian. You know what happened? Against all odds, by the grace of God, that life sentence was reduced to 4.5 years. And he got paroled of good behavior. This was 2 words that he would never have heard in his life before. If there's something that he would never heard from his parents, was you a good kid. He got paroled from prison for good behavior. This man, Salvador Sabina, went on to become a minister. He's got a big, beautiful, thriving church in the Bronx where he still ministers to the gangsters and the criminals in there. He's been all around the world telling people of the great things God has done for him. Salvador went through the fire. Now, he's on fire for the Lord. And it was only through those fires, through those trials, that he could get to where he was. Same as David, same as Moses. They had to go through trials of fire to unlock that potential, that purpose, that passion, that greatness. Salvador today is a great minister doing wonderful things for the Lord. He's been through the fire. He was promoted in a sense. He's come out. It was only for a time. It was not going to be forever. And when he came out, he was better off before. My challenge to you today is simple, like I started with. We all go through fires. That's a verse I want to put up now. And I love this verse in Isaiah. It says this, when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. When you walk through the fire, the key word for me in that whole verse is the first word. What is the first word? It doesn't say if. It says when. Isn't that sweet by and by? Isaiah says when. You will all go through fires. Everyone in this church will go through trials of heartache and pain, sorrow and loss. When? And it's fine. He says when you go through that, you won't be burned. And that means that you won't. It's not that you won't feel discomfort or pain. You will feel that because that's a part of life. It says that you won't be defeated, you won't be destroyed, you won't lose your purpose, you won't lose your potential. He says you will not feel any of that outward devil experience. The enemy won't try to harm you because God has got you. It's a controlled burn. It's not going to be forever. It's only temporary. And yes, the fires may be rough and it may overwhelm you, but there's a fourth person in the fire with you today, and his name is Jesus. You may not see him or experience him or see the changes, but it does not say that God is not there and God is not working in your life. My challenge is just don't fight the fire. There's promotion in the fire. There's favor in the fire. And there is freedom in the fire. Amen.